Bob Custer became a huge Western star at the end of the silent era, but by 1937 he was retired. Why? Join me as I investigate. Bob Custer was born Raymond Anthony Glenn in 1898 in Frankfort, Kentucky, to John and Mary Agnes Glenn. The Glenns owned a grocery store, and Raymond was the youngest of 7 children. After high school, Raymond attended the University of Kentucky and graduated around 1920, majoring in engineering. There's not a lot of information about what Raymond did after college or how he got from Kentucky to Hollywood, but some sites theorize that he could have worked on a cattle ranch and/or as a rodeo rider, which would make sense considering the career he would have once breaking into pictures. By 1924, Raymond made his screen debut as a star in Trigger Fingers, released by FBO, who had by then changed his name to Bob Custer. In a role similar to many that he would play in the future, he starred as Sergeant Bob Steele, an officer of the Texas Rangers that is out to capture a gang of outlaws. The film appears to have been a smash hit, and Bob became a star almost overnight. The Exhibitor's Herald wrote, "Trigger Fingers pleased well a full house on Saturday. They rave over Custer here and never get tired of looking at him. I would advise anyone to try his pictures where westerns are wanted." Bob was off to an impressive start, and FBO immediately followed up Trigger Fingers with Flashing Spurs, in which he played another heroic Texas Ranger. Sadly, this film did not review as well in the Exhibitor's Herald, but not discouraged, Bob made 7 more westerns in 1925 alone. FBO ran a significant amount of publicity on their new Western star, including an ad in Exhibitor's Herald that claimed his popularity was growing in leaps and bounds. Obviously, his home studio would want to really push his appeal, but he seems to have done really well that year, regardless of the publicity they put out. His films got varying levels of critical praise and photoplay in Herald, but that's to be expected for any star of any movie. In 1926, Bob began producing his own westerns at FBO, starting with Man Rustlin'. He followed this with 8 other westerns that year, including Beyond the Rockies and The Border Whirlwind. In 1927, Bob acted and produced 5 more westerns at FBO, including Cactus Trails and Galloping Thunder. One Exhibitor's Herald article stated that he was more popular than Tom Mix in some towns in America. Other articles in Exhibitor's Herald bring to light that sometimes 4 or more of Bob's westerns were playing at various theaters at a time, with different cities getting different ones. Later in 1927, Bob left FBO to make 3 pictures at Chadwick. What's very fascinating is that Chadwick elected to star Bob in non-Western pictures under his real name, Raymond Glenn. First, he starred as a paroled crook that wants to go straight with his old pal Strongheart the dog in The Return of Boston Blackie. I have to say that Bob, or Raymond, seems really at ease in this film, playing a totally different part than usual in a whole new genre. He portrays the reformed criminal with a style and ease that was not often prevalent in his Western hero characters. Next, he starred with Pauline Guerin and Gertrude Short in the comedy Ladies at Ease. Finally, he starred with Betty Compson in Temptations of a Shop Girl, a crime drama. However, after these 3 movies, Raymond went back to going by his stage name Bob Custer and signed to Syndicate to star in a number of silent westerns in 1928 and 1929, including Arizona Days, in which he played undercover agent Chuck Drexel out to help Dolly, played by Peggy Montgomery. Bob stayed at Syndicate through the beginning of 1930, with his final film there being Covered Wagon Trails, which was released as a silent in February of 1930. While it seems odd that a studio would still be making silents this late, we have to remember that at this time, several smaller towns had not yet the money or technology to play talkies in their theaters, so silents were still quite popular in those towns. In late 1930, Bob signed with the Poverty Row studio Big Four, which put out a number of westerns and publicized its stars often, like Bob, Buzz Barton, and Wally Wales. Bob made his talkie debut in 1930s under Texas skies as a cowboy hero named Rankin. Bob starred in 7 more westerns at Big Four through 1932, ending with The Scarlet Brand. He then took 3 years off from the movie industry. In 1926, Bob had married Anne Cudahy, a wealthy heiress, and 2 years later they welcomed a son, Raymond. By the end of the 1920s, Bob was earning up to $1,000 a week at FBO, but when that contract ended and then the stock market crashed, Bob lost most of his money, leading to a troubled marriage that ended in divorce in 1933. I'm assuming Bob's time off from the screen was to deal with his divorce proceedings. In 1934, Bob returned to the screen at Mascot Pictures, starring with Rex the Wonder Horse and Rin Tin Tin Jr. in the serial Law of the Wild, in which he played their owner that is wrongfully framed and has to clear his name, with the help of his 2 animal friends, of course. Bob then took another 2 years off from the movies before returning one last time in 1936 to 1937 for a 3-picture deal with Reliable Pictures. He first starred as a marshal in Ambush Valley, then an insurance agent that helps Rin Tin Tin Jr. again find his owner's murderer in Vengeance of Rana, and finally as the title character in Santa Fe Rides, in which Reliable tried to market him as a singing cowboy. However, the movie was not successful, and Reliable ended up going bankrupt in 1937, leading Bob to call it quits with the movie business for good. According to bwesterns.com, Bob's loss of fortune in 1929 meant that his movie work was not enough to support his wife and son, so in the early 30s he ran his own construction business. Following his retirement from the movies in 1937, Bob, now going by Raymond again, used his engineering degree that he had received close to 20 years before to begin work as a building inspector, eventually becoming the chief building inspector in Newport Beach, California. In 1948, Raymond, or Bob, married Mildred Bowers, a happy marriage that lasted until his death. In the 1960s, some renewed interest in Bob's career began to occur. Los Angeles TV producers had created a morning children's show entitled Butch and Billy's Bang Bang Westerns, in which silent westerns would play while commentary was given. The producers reached out to Bob and paid him very well to use many of his films on the series. In 1967, he visited Frankfurt for the first time in years and gave a lengthy interview to the State Journal about his movie career and his life since it ended. Bob seemed to enjoy a happy, quiet retirement with Mildred and passed away from a heart attack at the age of 76 in 1974 in Redondo Beach. So we are left with the question, why did Bob Custer's stardom lose momentum in the talkies after a rather impressive start? Well, bwesterns.com analyzes several theories, mentioning that some modern reviewers view Bob's talkie work as quote-unquote wooden. But they argue that many of the early talkie western heroes came across that way. I agree with that opinion. Bob and other western heroes sometimes came across as wooden due to the way that their lines were written, the way that they were directed, and the physical limitations they may have had due to all the new talkie technology equipment that was needed to record sound for these talkies. Bob demonstrated in his silence, and in particular his non-Western silence, that he had a large range as an actor that was often untapped by movie producers. If he came across as wooden, I feel certain that the script or direction were to blame, as Bob had a true natural talent. I think the real reason his career failed in the talkies was due to his loss of fortune and the stock market crash, which led to his having to take time off to deal with a disintegrating marriage, and thus he was away from the screen for too long. When he tried to make comebacks, he unfortunately chose 2 studios that were about to go bankrupt, a fact that B Westerns corroborates. It's a real shame, like I said before, as Bob had a natural innate talent that allowed him to portray a variety of characters. While he most often played the Western hero, he made that character interesting even when it wasn't necessarily written to be. I wish he had had more opportunities in the talkies, as I believe he could have made a successful career in non-Western parts as well as the Western ones. At least we have several of his films available to watch. I suggest checking out The Return of Boston Blackie on YouTube for a non-Western, and Ambush Valley, Vengeance of Rana, and Law of the Rio Grande on YouTube or Tubi to see some of his talkie Western work. Here's to you, Bob Custer. I must thank Chuck Anderson and all the folks at bwesterns.com for providing a plethora of information and wonderful photographs on the life and career of Bob Custer. Check out their website to learn about a Western star today. Please like and subscribe or follow this account if you want to learn more about the history of silent film stars whose stardom only lasted briefly in the talkies. Up next, join me as I cover the silent talkie career of the beautiful Lily Demita. Thank you so much for joining me. Have a wonderful rest of your weekend.